Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our today's virtual talk. That's about, it's titled Human, Non-Human Primate Conflict Mitigation Approaches, Lessons from Olive Baboons. That will be presented by Dr. Corinna Most. As you know, tomorrow is the International Primate Day, and so this talk really came in right handy. My name is Richard Kipngeno. I am a budding and membership officer here at Nature Kenya, and I will be the moderator of the talk. So just a quick ground rules. I will request all the participants that we remain muted to give the presenter ample time to exhaust the presentation. And should you have any question, any concern, any comment, you can always raise them through the chat box, and we will strive our level best to go through all of them after the presentation is over. And we're also recording this presentation, and after that, we will upload it in our YouTube channel where you can always revisit when you feel like you want to refer something. And also, we will be live in Nature Kenya Facebook page. We can also interact online there. So this virtual talk has been organized by Nature Kenya, the Institute of Primate Research, IPR, Wildlife Research and Training Institute, WRTI, Iowa State University, Uwasongiro Baboon Project, Kenya Wildlife Service, Friends of Karura Forest, and National Environment Management Authority, and Northern Rangelands Trust. So ladies and gentlemen, just a quick introduction of who our speaker for today is. Dr. Corinna Most is a faculty member in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Organismal Biology at Iowa State University. And she is also the co-director of the Uwasongiro Baboon Project in Laikipia, Kenya. She received her PhD in biological anthropology with a specialization in anthropogeny from the University of California, San Diego in the year 2018 under the mentorship of Dr. Shirley Strum. Dr. Most's research program involves two main lines of investigation. One, the ontogeny of social competence in wild olive baboons, the Papio anubis, and two, the long-term effects of ecological changes on wild olive baboons' behavior and reproductive parameters. More broadly, she is interested in the origins, evolution, and development of social cognition, and her approach is interdisciplinary, combining theories and methods from anthropology, developmental and comparative psychology, and cognitive sciences. Together with the rest of the Uwasongiro Baboon Project leadership, Dr. Most also helped to support and maintain several long-term community-based conservation programs aimed at ameliorating human-wildlife conflict in the area surrounding the project, including educational initiatives at the local secondary school and the Women's Resource Center. And ladies and gentlemen, it's my ample opportunity to welcome on board our today's speaker, Dr. Corinna Most. Welcome.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Unfortunately, once I do that, I can't see any of the Zoom videos or anything. So as Richard said, if you have any questions or if you want to make comments, please write them in the chat and we will have time at the end for that. So let me go ahead and start. Okay, so again, thanks, Richard, for that really lovely introduction. Thank you and Stan for inviting me. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk a little bit about the all the conservation projects and practices that the UNBP has done over the last few decades. Baboons are an interesting perspective into conservation topics because usually when we talk about conservation, you're talking about trying to prevent species from going extinct. But as you'll see, baboons are not at any risk of going extinct. They are in fact thriving. They're a very successful primate species. And so in fact, a lot of the conservation practices that the UNBP has been involved in have aimed to ameliorate the conflict between baboons and the humans that live along them. Because in a lot of the areas where they range, they're considered pests. One of the things I really need to mention before I start this talk is that the UNBP is much bigger than me. And so the first thing I want to do is introduce our team. So we have our co-directors and our field team pictured in this photo. So In the back row, from left to right, we have co-director Dr. Federico Rossano from University of California, San Diego. And then there's me from Iowa State University. And then 3 of our field observers, Francis Molo, Johnson Kassir, and Butu Masik. And then in the front row, from left to right, and I really want you to memorize this name, is Dr. Shirley Strom. She's going to play a very big part in today's talk. She is the founder and currently one of the directors of the Wazoniro Baboon Project. And I started working at the Wazoniro Baboon Project in 2010, but we had this shift in leadership only in 2022. So a lot of the times when I say the UNBP or Wazoniro Baboon Project has done this or that, what I really mean is Shirley has done this or that. And as you'll see, her community-based conservation policies even predate the UNBP. So next to Shirley, we have Ngoya Kilua, James Kingao, and then the third co-director, Dr. Monica Wakefield, who should be watching this with her students right now. So hi, Monica, and hi, Monica's students. And then in the inset, we have Patrick. I could not, for the life of me, find a photo of all of us together at the same time. So I had to do this. Patrick is, again, one of our field observers and ecological team members. Okay, so to introduce the stars of the show, sorry, I think my computer glitched a little bit. There we go. So to introduce the stars of the show, Olive Baboons, their species name is Papia nubis. As I mentioned, very successful primate species. You can see here their distribution across equatorial Africa in green on the map. They're large-bodied terrestrial monkeys. And as you can see in this photo, they live in very large groups. These groups are called troops, and they can reach over 100 individuals. And in fact, the troop that we're currently studying at the UNBP at one point was over 150 animals. So that is a lot of animals to keep track of. They are female philopatric, which means that females remain in their natal troop for their whole lives, and they're matrilineal. So these large groups within them are structured along female maternal lines. So although the groups are very large, within them, there are smaller subgroups of individuals related through the maternal line. As they become adults, they join the hierarchy, and there's 2 parallel hierarchies. So there's the female hierarchy and the male hierarchy. And males in general outrank all females just because they're larger, but females themselves have their own hierarchy. And the female hierarchy is very strict, very well determined. Females inherit their rank from their mother. So that is the rank they are going to have for their whole life. Male rank is a little bit more fluid and dynamic because, as you can imagine, they are in a new troop, a new group. They don't live with their relatives. There's no one to inherit their rank from. And so a lot of times, the way males achieve high rank is through fighting. And so one of the big determinants of a male's rank is how large, how aggressive, how good of a fighter they are. However, for both males and females, one of the main determinants of whether they're going to win an aggressive encounter is how many animals they can rally in their support. And so what this means is that we see a lot of really interesting alternative social strategies to direct competition. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of a few of them, just because I think it gives a really nice insight into how socially sophisticated and complex these animals can be. So the first one I want to mention are friendships. These are long-term relationships between males and females. And at a very, very basic level, these can be interpreted as an exchange of favors, right? So the female is receiving protection from aggression during fights from the male, and the male may gain priority of access or access to reproductive opportunities with the female. But these relationships last much longer than just around the female's fertility window. So what you can see here is a male on the left grooming his female friend on the right, and you will notice that her infant, the female's infant, is in between her legs. And if you squint a little bit, you can see that the infant still has the black natal coat that infants are born with. So this tells us that this infant is still very, very young, certainly still nursing. And usually when females are lactating, nursing their infants, they're not also ovulating. So in this case, this male is investing time and resources in grooming this female when there's no possibility that she might be fertile, no opportunity to mate with her. So these extend beyond just this exchange of protection for sexual access. And in fact, there was some recent genetic data that came out of our site in 2019 by Veronica Stadler et al. That actually saw that some of these long-term friendships might actually be interpreted as parenting, paternal investment, due to the fact that some of these males had their strongest friendships with the mothers of their infants. So really interesting, complex background to this relationship. Another interesting social behavior that we see, particularly in males, are coalitions and alliances. So in this case, in this photo, you can see an aggressive encounter between one male on the right and two males on the left. And we can tell that these males have an alliance. And the difference between coalition and alliance really depends on how long these relationships last for. So in this case, we'll say it's an alliance. And we can tell it's an alliance because if you can see, the male in the center has its hand on the back of the male next to him. And males don't usually touch each other unless they're fighting, unless it's an aggressive touch. And so this kind of very kind of gentle touch between these two males indicates a very strong relationship and a strong trust between them in this moment, which is also being displayed to the other male. And so as you can see here, this is the same encounter from the opposite perspective. That alliance won this encounter, right? So you have the male in the foreground in the second photo with his tail up in a submissive sign. So the other two males together have won this encounter. And then the last behavior that I want to talk about is, I think, one of the most fascinating behaviors in the animal world. So this is called agonistic buffering. And I'm actually going to show you pictures of it because it just makes it easier to explain it this way. So again, you start off with two males fighting, and then one of the males walks off and grabs an infant. And then with this infant, he goes back towards the other male, and this is the end of the aggressive encounter. So as you can see, phase one, the two males are fighting. Phase two, the male goes, grab the infant, goes back to the other male. And then phase four, the other male leaves. So this infant somehow has completely inhibited any further escalation of the aggression. The fight is over. The male with the infant has won this encounter. So obviously, when people first started observing this, they were very confused, very surprised by what was happening. Why were infants so powerful? How could they stop a fight between two full-grown males? And they came up with a lot of different hypotheses. So one of the first hypotheses was, okay, well, maybe this is a hostage situation, right? The male is going and grabbing the infant, the offspring of the other male, and is holding it in a threatening way that prevents the other male from continuing the aggression. Another possibility was that it was kind of the opposite. The male would grab his own infant, and this was basically a way to demonstrate that they were willing to fight to the death because they had something to protect, just kind of showing how determined they were. Since then, we have genetic data. Turns out neither of these hypotheses is really supported by the data. And so, in fact, what the real explanation is that when two males fight, usually the rest of the troop doesn't get involved, right? They let them fight it out. The other individuals don't really care as much. However, when an infant is in danger, when an infant is involved in a fight, when an infant expresses distress, then his mother or her mother, and then the mother's friend, and eventually the rest of her group might mob whoever is causing that distress. And so basically what is happening here is that the second male is leaving, the male without the infant is leaving because he doesn't want to risk distressing the infant and having the rest of the group intervene in the defense of the infant. You can imagine, however, that there's a catch, right, to this behavior, because if the infant gets distressed or expresses distress in phase two, when the first male is trying to grab him, then the strategy is totally going to backfire on that male, and he's going to be the one that gets mobbed by the rest of the troop. And so, in fact, what we see is that males don't just decide to use infants as these social tools for agonistic buffering on a whim, because that wouldn't work. And instead, males spend a lot of time handling and grooming infants, a lot of time, so that when eventually they need to use them as agonistic buffers, the infants will be completely calm and confident in their relationship with the male. So obviously, as you can imagine, this takes a long time. This is one of two videos that I'm going to show you today. And I really want to show it because baboons, especially male baboons, often get a really bad reputation as aggressive animals, always fighting. But I want to show with this video that they can also display really, really gentle behavior, especially when they're interacting with infants. And so what I'm going to show you here is an adult male trying to develop this bond, this relationship with an infant by grooming it. The infants are completely oblivious, completely naive. They don't really understand what's happening. They definitely don't know that this is some kind of long-term social strategy on the part of the male. And so as long as the male is grooming the infant is totally fine. Why not? Grooming is a pleasant experience. And so you'll see that the male keeps grooming and grooming, and the infant is fine with that. But eventually the male tries to take this relationship a step further and tries to take the infant and leave with the infant. And at that point, the infant starts expressing some distress, and the male immediately leaves him, lets him go back to his mother, who is foraging nearby, completely unconcerned. And then you'll see that the male makes these grunting noises that are friendly, reassuring noises, and then the mother and the infant leave. So this is still a male trying to develop that relationship with the infant. Mother feeding. I apologize, the audio is a little bit quiet, but hopefully you could hear or at least see that the infant immediately became a little distressed when the male tried to leave and ran back to his mother, and the male followed him, making these soothing grunting noises. Another version of the agonistic buffer is called a passport, and this is the second and last video of baboons that I'm going to show today. And a passport basically occurs when there isn't even an aggressive encounter yet. So basically a male will take an infant and walk towards another male in order to displace them. So in order to make them leave and kind of assert their dominance towards them. So just to set the scene for this video, it is a consort situation. So you can see in the foreground, a female with this bright pink swelling on her butt, which is telling us that she's ovulating. It's also telling the males that she's ovulating. And then you have the consort male, who's the big male right next to her, that's grooming her. But usually consorts don't consist of just the female and the consort male. There's usually a lot of follower males all around that are trying to get a chance to mate with that female. And so it's a pretty tense situation for males. Being close to the male with the female is a good thing. But in general, you have all these males kind of around them, following them throughout the day. So what you'll see here is you can see there's a little infant that's kind of wandering around between the consort male and the female. And the male that's sitting on the left has a friendship with this infant, has a bond with this infant. And so you'll see him make what's called a come hither face. So a face that's kind of an attractive come towards me face. And then as soon as the infant goes to him, he grabs him, and you'll see that he makes a beeline towards a third male that's sitting outside of the shot right now. And as soon as he approaches that male just with the infant, that male just leaves. That's the come hither face. And you can see that that male in the background immediately left. Didn't even try to retain his place, didn't even try to challenge the male. Male approach with the infant, and that other male completely immediately left. And this displacement is usually being displaced as a sign of being subordinate. It's a submissive behavior. Okay, so the last thing I want to mention is some really interesting ecological change that's happened at the field side, and this is going to come back later when we talk about human wildlife and even human plant conflict. So this is the spread of a really, really highly invasive prickly pear cactus. The species name is Opuntia stricta. You can see it here in this beautiful photo. So Opuntia stricta, this prickly pear cactus, is originating from the Southeast United States. So definitely not native to Kenya, but it was introduced there in the 1950s as a living hedge. And then in the early 2000s, because of a confluence of ecological factors that Shirley has called a perfect storm of ecological factors, it started spreading and it hasn't stopped. And this is a really, really highly invasive plant species. The instructions to kill it, to get rid of it, include cutting it, burning it, and then burying it 6 feet under. So you can imagine it's really, really hard to get rid of. Any single part of the plant that you drop is going to sprout a new plant. So it doesn't have to be the seed. It can be a piece of the fruit. It can be a piece of the pad. Anything that you drop is going to sprout a plant. So it's pretty much, I call it the zombie plant from hell, because it's extremely, extremely hard to get rid of. So as you can imagine, everybody hates it. It's also really hard to harvest. So even though these fruits look so delicious and they are pretty tasty, the plant itself is covered in thorns, really long thorns. But the fruits also have really, really fine hair-like glockets, really fine hair-like spines on them, that thorns that get in your hands and your mouth. So it's really, really hard to harvest. Local people don't like it. Livestock doesn't like it, but the baboons love it. And that's one of the things that makes baboons really, really successful. They are extremely good at foraging. So with their handy little hands, they are really good at cleaning the fruit, eating it. And it's actually proved to be a boon to the baboons because it's really high in sugars, really high in water content, and it's drought tolerant and available year round. And so even when other foods might not be available, the baboons can still obtain calories and water from these fruits. And the baboons love them so much that some of their sleeping sites have become basically surrounded by Opuntia Opuntia plants. Baboons tend to defecate in the morning when they come down from the sleeping sites. So a lot of the plants end up concentrating around the sleeping sites, and they become basically impenetrable forests around them. Now, yes, baboons are one of the agents of dispersal of this Opuntia, but as I mentioned, they keep it mostly constrained within their range around their sleeping sites. And in fact, the real culprits of the long distance dispersal of Opuntia are elephants. So elephants are migratory animals. They travel hundreds of kilometers, thousands of kilometers. And you can see on the right, they can also eat a lot of Opuntia. So that is a photo of some elephant feces, some elephant dung. And you can see they're completely full of partially digested Opuntia. So yes, baboons love the Opuntia. Yes, baboons spread it in the area around their sleeping sites, but really it's elephants that have been the biggest concern in terms of spreading it long distances. So I mentioned that this has been a boon to these baboons. One of the things that it has really affected are their reproductive parameters. And as Richard was saying, that was one of the things I was interested in. And just to give you an example, so this was one of the females I was studying during my dissertation, Becca. She was the highest ranking female, so she was already starting off with an advantage. But in general, baboons reproduce maybe once every 2 years or so, so they'll have offspring spaced every 2 years. The higher caloric input of the Opuntia allowed all these animals to be in such excellent body condition that females had enough resources to reproduce much faster. And so instead of every 2 years, Becca specifically was having infants a lot faster. So here you have Barney, one of her older sons. He was 2 years and 9 months at the time of this photo. And the second one, Bongo, he was 1 year and 2 months. So definitely not 2 years spacing between them. And then finally, Italy, the last one born, was 2 months old. So actually her and Bongo almost shared a birthday. They were almost exactly a year apart. So this female was reproducing almost every year instead of every 2 years, thanks to the higher caloric content. Okay, so that is all I would have to say for now about the baboons. The next thing I want to talk about a little bit is the history of the Wasaniara Baboon Project. And that's because this history is very intrinsically intertwined with its conservation practices. So The Baboon Project, as I mentioned, was founded by Dr. Shirley Strum. It was founded in 1984 at its current location in Laikipia, Kenya, near the town of Opole, but it was founded through the translocation by Shirley of 3 baboon troops from Gilgil, which is north of Nairobi in the Rift Valley of Kenya, to their current location near the town of Opole. And if you squint, I mapped this on Google Maps, and this is about a 190-kilometer distance. I don't know if this is exactly the route that Shirley took. It was about 120 miles. And I don't know if you've ever tried to translocate wildlife, wild animal populations, but it's not an easy process, right? So these are just some images of what the process looked like. The animals had to be sedated, they had to be individually caged, and then eventually they had to be transported and released to their new location. And if you want to read more about it, I can't recommend Shirley's book enough, Almost Human. It's a really, really fantastic account of just how she started doing research on the baboons and then this whole process of translocating them from one spot in Kenya to another spot. But one thing I will mention, just because it gives you some insight into how complicated this was and how smart she was about it, is that when they finally arrived in Laikipia at the location where she wanted to release them, she didn't just let them go. Because that wouldn't have allowed her to kind of like control where they went. As I've mentioned, baboons are usually considered pests. So if you are translocating baboons to a new location, you want to at least guarantee that you're going to be able to keep them there. And so what she did was, instead of releasing them all at once, first she released the females. And the females weren't willing to go very far without the males for protection. And so the females started moving around the area, finding the food to eat in that location, just kind of exploring the area. And so then eventually, when Shirley released the males, the females had already kind of established themselves there. Females, as sociological theory will tell you, map onto food resources, and then the males map onto the females. And so once the females had found their site, the area that they wanted to be here in and wouldn't want to leave, the males also stayed. So you might be asking yourself, okay, why go through this whole process of translocating baboon troops, right? Like, why would Shirley want to do this? Well, of course, the answer is human-baboon conflict. So there were a lot of farmers around where the baboons ranged at Gilgil, and some of the baboons developed a tradition of crop raiding. So they would go in and steal their crops. And it's really hard for humans to, get rid of all of these baboons that are trying to eat their crops. But Shirley was able to mitigate a lot of this conflict while she was there. Unfortunately, later, an army base, a military base was established in the area, and that just exacerbated the conflict because, of course, the soldiers had guns. And so eventually the only way for Shirley to save these baboons was to translocate them. And so she did. And I think it's nicely fitting and a little bit ironic that the cages that she used to trap them were baited with the same corn that they had so grown to love, right? Okay, so moving the baboons from Gilgil all the way to Laikipia. And here, very different cultural context. So not farmers, but instead Maasai livestock herders. So the people in the community around the UMBP are mostly livestock herders, Maasai, Samburu. And so here the conflict wasn't or isn't over crop raiding, but instead over livestock raiding. If you can look again in this photo, that used to be a chicken that male is feeding on. So here the conflict is not over crops, but rather it's over baboons entering the bomas, so the homesteads of the Maasai, where they keep the livestock in enclosures and killing their livestock. And this can be chickens, but it can also be baby goats, baby sheep. I have that quote in the title, "Why are you bringing your baboons here?" because I thought it was a really interesting example of how we interpret the world through our cultural lens. So you can see here on the left, again, this photo of the Maasai herdsmen. And so usually when they see animals moving along the landscape, it's these large herd of animals with their human owners behind them, herding them, right? And so when they saw these large group of baboons with our observers following them, heading towards their livestock, our observers told me that sometimes they were asked, "Why are you bringing your baboons here?" as if we had control over where these wild animals are going, the same way that a herder has control over where their livestock is going. So this kind of cultural misunderstanding of what was happening. And so I'm going to introduce one of the first conflict mitigation strategies that I'm going to talk about today. And this is something that Shirley had already started doing back in Gilgil, but that became more a part of the structure of the UNBP field team in Lake Hipia. So we hire trackers, and these trackers are individuals that spend all day with the troop. So from 6 in the morning when the troop leaves the sleeping site until 6 in the afternoon when they go back up to the sleeping site. And their job is to alert bomas and herders whenever the baboons are approaching. So you can see our tracker right here. They tend to be at the periphery of the troop, at the front of the troop, trying to predict where the troop is going to go. And so in general, we really try to never have the baboon troop be on its own without any observer. So if the tracker is not there, the observers will go alert the bomas. We really just try to have somebody there to alert people that the baboons might be coming and that the people need to chase them away. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, we can't ourselves chase the baboons. These are habituated animals, and chasing them would be counterproductive because they would then get dishabituated to us. So that would, endanger our research program. And so we really ask that people themselves chase the baboons. Now, obviously, we can't always be with the baboons. We can't always have somebody with the baboons. And there's also other baboon troops in the area that we don't follow that are not habituated. So baboons are an issue whether or not the UNBP were there. And so Shirley has developed these pamphlets that she hands out. You might not be able to read this, but it has 3 columns of writing. First one is in English, the second one in Kiswahili, and then Kima, which is the language of the Maasai. And it just has some best practices for what to do if the baboons are coming and threatening your livestock. So please chase, throw stones, and shout at any baboons that come near your livestock or boma. It also mentions that UNBP researchers do not herd baboons. They are wild animals and go where they want to. So again, that kind of cultural miscommunication. And then there's also a stick figure version of this, kind of with drawings. And the baboons will raid livestock, especially during droughts when other foods are not as readily available. So that's why it starts with danger, dry season. And again, it has a drawing of the baboon, Nyani, approaching the livestock. And we ask the people to chase them and throw rocks at them and try to get away from the livestock. So this is an example of direct conflict, right, between the humans and the baboons killing the human's livelihood. But there's also a form of indirect conflict, right? So as I mentioned, the Opuntia stricta is a huge issue in the area, and the baboons have been accused by the local community of spreading the Opuntia, or at least we have been accused of wanting the Opuntia there because it's such a great food for the baboons. And unfortunately, the Opuntia is not just taking over from the native flora, but it's also affecting the livestock, because when there isn't any other food, cows and goats and camels will try to eat Opuntia, but unlike baboons, they don't have hands. And so they have to go directly with their faces to eat it. And so this leads to them getting thorns on their faces, their tongues, their mouth, and this can cause infections and lead to problems with their digestive system. And so there's also conflict with the local community about this spread of the Opuntia. And there have been attempts to reduce the spread of the Opuntia. One of them has been the introduction of a biological control, so a cochineal pest insect. And you can see here on this Opuntia plant, all this white stuff on it, that's evidence of the presence of that cochineal insect. And so UNBP has helped with the spread of this cochineal insect by growing it in nurseries, going around and distributing it on the plants. So we're really highly involved in this kind of biological control attempt. And just incidentally, if the name cochineal, the word cochineal sounds familiar, is because this is the insect where the red cochineal dye is taken from. So this is just an example of what happens if with your fingers you rake through that white stuff, it's all red inside. And if the cochineal insect does its job, then the Opuntia becomes completely dried and dead. And that is one of the very few ways of trying to control it. So UNBP has been involved in spreading this insect, but we're also involved in monitoring its effects. So this is just an example of one of the ecological field sheets that we have. This is called monthly Opuntia monitoring. Patrick, if you remember him from the inset earlier, is our ecological monitor guy. And so he goes around and once a month has Opuntia plants that he goes and monitors. And you can see that one of the things that he records is whether there's any insect damage. And that refers to the cochineal insect. So we're also trying to see how successful this spread of the cochineal insect has been in controlling the. So these are good, conflict mitigation strategies for very specific problems as they arise. They address immediate concerns, immediate conflicts with the community. But over the past few decades, the conservation world has really started shifting their thinking to a bit of a broader understanding about what it takes to tackle conservation, and especially to tackle conservation issues long-term. And one of the approaches that has been found to be the most successful is community-based conservation. So at a very, very simple basic level, this means involving the local communities as much as possible in the conservation efforts. And I have the second part in parenthesis because it is a bit redundant to me because of course, if you're trying to involve a community long-term in an effort, you want to make sure that this community benefits from that conservation effort. If you're interested in reading more about the history of community-based conservation, again, Shirley and her husband, Dr. David Western, co-edited this book, Natural Connections, which is the product of a workshop that took place in 1993. So quite a while ago at this point. This is an approach that they have been championing for a really long time. And just to give you a nice quote about community-based conservation from the book, they say community-based conservation arises from within the community, or at least at the community level, rather than internationally or nationally. Community-based conservation reverses top-down, center-driven conservation by focusing on the people who bear the costs of conservation. In the broadest sense, then, community-based conservation includes natural resources or biodiversity protection by, for, and with the local community. So this is a very simple, even though groundbreaking concept. What does it look like in real life? What does it look like for the UNBP? The next few slides are just a few of the various ways in which the UNBP, and surely predating the UNBP back at Gilgil, attempted to promote community-based conservation. So one of the first ways, one of the most important ways, I think, is hiring local research assistants, right? Really embedding the project and its conservation efforts within the local community. And this is something, again, that Shirley had already started doing back in Gilgil. And this can also sometimes include hiring a local camp cat, like Zola, our fantastic, fearsome camp cat. Another way that the UNBP helps promote and support the local community is by supporting local schools and youth programs. So this can be either directly, materially, by providing funds, by providing supplies, by providing new buildings. It can also be more of a one-off thing. So last year, at the tail end of what had been one of the worst droughts in decades, we actually started a GoFundMe to try and raise funds to support local schools, to feed children that were going to school and were fainting because there was just not enough food. So this is more of a direct financial support for the local communities and institutions in the local communities that everybody's invested in, right? Schools benefit everybody. Everybody knows somebody or has somebody they're related to that is going to that school. So this is a way to really distribute the wealth within the community. Some examples of really cool youth programs that the UNBP has supported and championed throughout the years include a painting club that was run by artist Deborah Ross, who's based in New York. And this one also doubled as a way to preserve traditional knowledge, because a lot of the things that the children were drawing were traditional plants. And so there would also be a little caption explaining what the plant was for, what its traditional medicinal uses might have been for. And I really like this particular drawing because there's a baboon just listening to an elder talk about plants. Another really interesting program was the Maasai Cricket Warriors. They have a Facebook page. You can follow them. So this was a sports club started by Aaliyah Bauer from South Africa, who was one of the managers of the UNBP. And they were very successful. They traveled, they had show competitions. So this was another really cool way to kind of forge these bonds with the community and support these programs. But we don't want to forget that we're still trying ultimately to foster goodwill towards the baboons, right? And so just this summer, I received this Animal Behavior Society outreach grant. You can see my name all the way down there. And the goal of this grant is to support community engagement efforts. And so what this money allowed us to do was to work with the secondary school. So this would be middle and high school. So this is Monica and me and Kassir and one of our students with the principal of the secondary school, Mr. Moraga, who's been a huge supporter and collaborator for the Wazanir Baboon Project as we do these, we attempt to do these community-based conservation practices in the area. And so what the grant covered was funds for at-risk schoolgirls to remain at school during the holidays instead of having to go home, or they might have been at risk of early marriage or other risks. And so we covered their funds so that they could stay at school over the holidays. And then also we got to take them to the baboons. So this is a photo of a group of these schoolgirls from Il Palais Secondary School with James, one of our observers at the baboon sleeping site. You can also see how close we get to the baboons, how habituated they are. And then the idea was that they would come to the baboons and we'd kind of tell them about the baboons, kind of explain why we study them, why they're interesting animals to study. Because even though these schoolgirls and school children more generally live right next to the baboons, they have very few chances to interact with them, especially in such a positive way. But we thought it would be unfair to just limit our message of goodwill towards the baboons just to the schoolgirls, just to these few girls. And so we had a whole movie night at the local school. You can see basically the whole school was stuffed into this one room, and we showed Baboon Tales, which is a fantastic documentary from 1998, actually narrated by Glenn Close. And obviously, you know, it was filmed with the scientific supervision of Shirley. It was filmed right next to the school, so the students could recognize some of the landscape features from the video. And so we watched this movie, this documentary all together, and then we had a little bit of a Q&A with the students. We also brought Kassir, the observer that you saw in the previous photo, who used to be a student here at the high school. And so they got to ask him questions about what it was like to be a baboon researcher. So this was a really nice, positive experience, I think, not just for us, obviously, but also for the students. It kind of shed a new light onto the baboons. Okay, and then thinking even more broadly, one of the things that community-based conservation really promotes is enrichment and empowerment of the community. So again, Shirley was ahead of her time in doing this already in Gilgil, where she started a woolcraft project where people could make carpets and blankets with wool and natural dyes. And then here in Il Palais, Shirley was one of the founding members and is still a huge supporter, and the UMBP continues to support over the time of a women's cultural center. So Twala Women Cultural Village and Tenebo Research Center. And what this is a way for local Maasai women to kind of enter the market economy and become financially independent while still maintaining their traditional cultural identity. And so this is a cultural village where people can go and spend the day or spend the night, spend a few days. And the women engage them in a lot of cultural activity. And so I'm going to show you what this looks like. And the demonstrator are going to be Dr. Monica Wakefield and some of the students that were with us this past summer. So one of the first cultural activities, this is really kind of the epitome of cultural activity, is this big display with song and dance that the women do when the guests first arrive. Okay. And then some of the other activities that you can do is helping them daub mud on their traditional huts that you can see in the background, help fetch water from the riverbed and then carry it back. My students were really good at these too. And then a few of the other cultural activities include a cattle walk or a livestock walk, where you go out with the herders in the morning, you help them milk the cows. Students were not as good at this one.
Our cows cannot allow any other person. If I'm not at home. It's only you. Wait, how do you do that? You squeeze. You squeeze up, down. From the top. Yeah, get up in there. How the baby do it? Yeah, but then your hand is a little baby mouth.
And then we also got to meet one of the basically last remaining blacksmiths in the area. He was complaining that nobody wants to learn the craft from him, not even his sons. And so he was, you know, at Twala, and he showed us how to make arrows. He was talking about the poison plant that he sometimes may use to make the arrows even more lethal. And then he had us try to shoot these arrows. And again, my students were never good at this. And I should say I didn't even try, so.
Just like that. Like that, yes, yes. Pull it, then you loosen you pull, then you loosen the finger, you let it go. Loosen these fingers? Yeah, like now you tighten now when you release, you loosen the finger, you let it go.
A nice attempt. And then another one of the things that they do is make these beautiful necklaces and bracelets that you see just displayed on their necks. And so beadwork is, again, one of these traditional activities, and they also sell these as souvenirs to the visiting guests. But the women have also developed their own forms of kind of ways to make money. So they produce and sell products like honey, aloe. At some point, there was even an attempt to make opuntia lucrative or profitable by making a syrup and then making cocktails with it. Unfortunately, it's just too labor intensive to process. So it just wasn't worth it, the women's time. And then again, as I mentioned, always with an eye to fostering goodwill towards the baboons, one of the activities that guests can do when they visit Twala is walk with baboons. So this is a troop of baboons that was semi-habituated by the UMBP. It's not one of our study troops, it's a separate troop. And then a woman from Twala will guide the tourists to go visit the baboons, and they will walk with the baboons. And so even though UMBP was instrumental in habituating the troop, all of the funds, all of the money that is made out of these baboon walks goes directly to Twala and the community. Okay, and the last thing I want to bring up, and you know, the way I'm framing it here kind of makes it look like this is part of a long-term community-based conservation approach from the UMBP. But really what it is that if you do have a long-term field site in an area, you form connections with the community, right? You are embedded in the community, you develop long-term relationships, you develop friendships with the community. So on the left, you can see again the schoolgirls with my students. And then in the center, you can see the students learning from our friend Wambui how to make chapatis, which are these delicious traditional tortillas that are made there. So they're learning how to make chapatis. And then as we were talking to Wambui, it turned out she'd never gone to see the baboons. Again, she lives in Opole, she sees them from a distance, but she'd never gone with us to see the baboons. And I've been, again, going to this field site for 13 years. The UMBP has been there for a long time. It just had never occurred to me that this might be something she'd want to do. And so she did come to the baboons, and she came with her 2 kids, and they spent the whole morning with us. I kept checking in with her and being like, let me know if you want to go home. You know, it's been a few hours now. They loved it. They had never been this close to baboons. They were really surprised by how calm the baboons were, by how habituated they were. And so again, there's always new things that I think of or realize I could be doing to foster this goodwill towards the baboons in the community. Okay, I'm not sure. I think I might have gone a little bit over 30 minutes, but before I close, I just wanted to acknowledge a few more people. So again, Kasir and Goya, Philemon, who's our tracker, James, Butu, Francis, Patrick, all the other UMBP observers, both past and present, the people who help us out with the tons of data that we collect in the office, so Julie and David, senior collaborators, Marie Bourgeat and Deborah Foster, and then the co-directors, again, Federico Rossano, Monica Wakefield. Obviously photographed here, founder and co-director, Dr. Shirley Strum, with my NSF IRES students from this past summer. And again, Dr. Stankivai, who had the idea to invite me and give me this great opportunity to talk about our work. And IPR director, Dr. Peter Motera. HiPR has been a very strong collaborator of MVP, so we hope to continue that relationship moving forward. So thank you all for listening, and I would love to have a productive conversation about other issues, challenges, approaches that people have faced or have adopted in their own experience. So I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see everybody again. Let's open the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Corinna, for such a very insightful discussion. Going quickly to the questions that have started coming in through the chat box, we have quite a number. And I will start by going through, okay, Evans is saying, hello, everyone. It's Evans, so we are from Masai Mara University. And so there's a question from Peter Fundi. For how long were the male baboons held in the cages before release?
That's an excellent question. I'm not sure if Shirley is here. I don't remember. I would imagine it must have been a few days. So maybe a week or so, just enough time for the females to kind of settle in, understand what the area was like, and feel comfortable there. Yeah.
Okay, great. And there's also another question from Peter Fundi. When chasing the baboon groups, do they respond the same towards women and men?
No, that is such an excellent question. Baboons are really, really good at reading intentions. And so, first of all, how determined you are when you're chasing them is going to matter, right? No matter your age, no matter your sex, how determined you are, that's going to make a difference. But then, yes, absolutely. They're much more scared of men than they are of women or children. They're much more scared of men with spears than they are of women or children. If they see a man dressed in full Moran Maasai dress, right, the warrior outfit with the bright red colors, they will be out of there. Like, they will run so fast. Dogs also are very scary to the baboons, even though a whole troop of baboons against one dog, I would not count on those odds for the dog. So yes, absolutely, it makes a huge difference who it is that's chasing them and how determined they are when they're chasing them.
Thank you for that response. There's another question from Peter Murithi. The plant seems to be affecting the community in the area. Is there any ways they can benefit also from the plant?
You know, we've tried, like I said, the Twala tried to make a cocktail out of it. It's just really labor intensive. It's really labor intensive. It's hard to harvest. One thing they're trying to do now is use it as biofuel. So they just kind of like cut it all up and put it through this kind of like wood chopper kind of machine and process it. And then that produces some gases and they can use that as biofuel. But there's just so much of it and it's so labor intensive that I don't know if there's really a good way to make it benefit the community. So right now, really, I think the goal is to get rid of it so that local plants can have a chance to come back, which is not a given because also there's a lot of overgrazing in the area. And so it's not the case that as soon as the puncha is gone, local plants are going to be able to come back. It's going to take a bigger ecological effort.
Okay, thank you for that response. There is a question from Leo Kasoha, and Leo probably is raising this question from Laikipia. How effective are the cochineal insects? Roughly, how many do you need per cactus, and how fast do they reproduce?
Yeah, very good question. So they are extremely effective if they get a chance to take root on the plant. So one of the issues is that this approach was pioneered or started in South Africa, where there's only one rainy season, whereas in Kenya there's two, or at least in Laikipia there's two rainy seasons. And so what happens when it rains is that the insect gets wiped off, it gets washed off by the rain. And so this requires additional effort to go back and kind of implant it onto the plant. And so it's not as effective as it could be if it had the chance to just really stick to the plant long term. But in general, once it has stuck to the plant and once it starts drying it up, especially if you introduce it towards the base of the plant rather than towards the top, it's pretty effective. I'm not sure how many you need per cactus, though. I'm sorry.
Thank you for the response. We go ahead. There's another question from Dr. Stan Givai. How is the community-based conservation through various conservation initiatives changing the local community perceptions towards primates, baboons, and also other monkeys in the areas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as for other monkeys, there's really only a few vervets around, and they don't really seem to bother people very much. So I think really baboons are the main issue in the area for human primate conflict. I think it's getting better. Our observers say it's getting better. We've had some community meetings recently where it was really nice. The Twala women actually spoke up for the baboon project and kind of defended us from accusations of, spreading opuntia and things like that. And so I think overall, slowly, in general, attitudes towards the baboons are improving. I should say one of the troops that we used to study lived closer to the origin site of the spread of opuntia, and human baboon conflict there got really, really intense because it became a more sedentized area. There were more houses, more bomas. And so Shirley made the executive decision to just not follow those baboons anymore, just because the conflict was getting so strong that it put the baboons in danger, but it also put the observers in danger. And so in some areas, we've kind of lost that fight. But in El Palais, I think because we're so close, we live nearby, we have these long-term connections to the community, I think it is improving. We haven't had any big issues for a while now.
Thank you for that. There's another question from Siddharth. Are there known possible negative effects of consuming the cochineal infested cactus by the baboons, or do they avoid the cactus after the insect is introduced?
Yeah, hey Sid, that's a really good question. So like I said, baboons are really successful foragers. They will eat anything. So they don't care. We have seen the baboons drag their fingers to the opuntia, to the cochineal and lick their fingers. They do not avoid the cactus after it's been introduced. Obviously, once the plant starts dying, it's not going to produce fruits. It's not going to have any water, even in the pads. So I will say, once the drought was happening, the opuntia, even though it's drought tolerant, it's not drought resistant. And so they were producing a lot fewer fruits, but they still had water in the pads. And so the baboons actually shifted from eating the fruits to eating the pads. So during the drought, their poop went from being bright red from the fruits to being bright green from the pads, and very watery because they were eating all of these juicy pads, but it allowed them to survive this drought that killed a lot of the wildlife in the area. So the baboons, just like humans with pigs, they won't waste any part of the opuntia. They will eat all of it, including the cochineal. Yeah.
Thank you. And there is a comment from Tony Wambua from our Facebook page. Thank you, Dr. Corinna, for such a very wonderful talk. Thank you very much, also Tony. And there is another question from Faith Jimmy. Is the cochineal instead used to control the spread of cactus? I'm looking for a way to mitigate the spread of cactus.
Yeah. At this point, it's the best way we have to control it on a wide scale, because you just can't go around and cut and burn and bury all of the plants. There's just too many of them. So yeah, right now the cochineal seems to be the best agent of control for this plant. And it's not, biological controls are always a little risky. There's always the chance that they're going to kind of go out of hand. But the cochineal insect is specific to this plant. It's a specific pest to this plant. And so the idea is, once the opuntia is gone, so will be the cochineal.
Yeah, thank you. Peter Fundi again, do you have initiatives to regenerate areas where opuntia has been removed?
Yeah, so we, as the UNBP, we don't really. I know there's a lot of NGOs in the area that have tried to promote ecological restoration practices. World Vision from the Netherlands. There's a lot of deep gullies in the area, because with the loss of native plants, what happens when it rains is that a lot of the soil gets washed away. And so you get these really deep gullies. And so they've tried to do things like put branches in the gullies to try and prevent that erosion. The UNBP will be involved. We will help with all of these initiatives, absolutely. But we specifically don't have any initiatives that we're starting ourselves.
Thank you. From Brian Otiego, the interventions are so impressive. How then do you measure true human perception change towards conservation of baboons?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, one of the things is just when we're out with the baboons, how do people react, right? Are they throwing rocks at us or not? So in general, I have felt like the community opinion of the baboons has shifted. I feel like we have very good relationships with the community right now. As I mentioned, Twala is a very strong supporter, and they are a very strong voice in the community. There's over 100 women that are part of Twala now, so a lot of the community is part of it, and they are very intertwined with the Baboon Project. And so in general, I do think attitudes have shifted towards the better in the area.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question from Catherine Wambani. Thanks for the findings. What's the source or origin of cochineal insects?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would imagine they've co-evolved with the Opuntia plant, but I don't know that for sure. I do know that the use of them as biological controls of cochineal was started in South Africa, but I don't know if that's where they're from. I would imagine they're from the same area that the Opuntia is from, so the Southeast United States.
Thank you. And there's one last question from that has come through our chat box. It's also from Leo Kasoha. With the recent long droughts that overrides the washing of cochineal by rains, do you know if there has been a substantial reduction of the cactus by the cochineal?
Absolutely, that is a fantastic question. Yes, there has been. And also not only that, but like I said, the drought itself was already weakening the plants. And so, yes, we have seen a big reduction in the area in not just the number of Opuntia, but the number of Opuntia that has fruits. So this summer, when I was there in the past summer, yeah, there's still a few Opuntia, but a lot of them just don't have fruits. A lot of them are dying. A lot of them are stunted. And so, you know, closer to the origin site of the spread of the Opuntia, there was just so much of it that I don't know if it has made a dent there. But where the baboons are that we study now, which is about 20 kilometers away, 10 kilometers away, there was less Opuntia to begin with, and that Opuntia does seem like it's definitely dying. You know, I don't know, it's probably not going to take very long for it to make a comeback if the rains start again, but definitely the drought combined with the cochineal seems to have made a huge impact on it.
Thank you. From Brian, apart from rain, does the cochineal insects also have predator?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I haven't seen anything eat it, no birds or anything. Like I said, the baboons will sometimes scrape it off, but I don't think that really affects it that much. So no, I don't think so. I think apart from the rain, this is a really, really good way to try to control Opuntia. So if it's done well, it can be very successful, especially in, you know, well-contained areas.
Okay, thank you. There is, okay, from Dr. Stan. Corinna, thank you so much. The talk was well tied to this year's International Primates Day theme, saving wild primates by promoting coexistence in shared spaces. There is no better way to explain this than the community-based conservation approach and the community projects you have presented.
Thank you, Stan.
Thank you very much, Stan, for such a nice, closing remarks to all of the questions, comments that have come in through our chat box. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Corinna said, this is a very interactive session. I will open floor to anyone that would like to interact one-on-one with the speaker by asking a question, giving a comment. You can raise your hand, and then we'll give you the opportunity to do that. The floor is open.
I don't know how to raise my hand.
Okay, go ahead, Rupi.
Sorry, I've tried, but anyway, Corinna, I want to ask you, and this is not a very basically the question is, the baboons are not endangered, they're considered pests, so why are you really studying them?
Well, because I didn't start out being interested in conservation. So
no, I mean not you as a person.
Oh, sorry.
But generally, why? When they're considered pests, they're not in any, they're not endangered. So why are they being studied?
Well, because the focus of the Baboon Project, the Wasn't Your Baboon Project, and all the research sites that study baboons and other primates or animals that aren't endangered is because we're interested in the animals themselves, right? So as I tried to describe, the baboons have these really complex, sophisticated social behaviors. But beyond that, they're just really interesting animals on their own. And so we try to study them, and we hope that, by ameliorating this conflict with the local communities, we can also help the local communities. But really, the focus of the UNBP is research on the monkeys themselves rather than conservation.
Okay, thank you. May I have just ask one more question?
Sure.
All right. So have the balloon population in Olpalai, where you have your study area, has it increased, decreased over the years?
Yeah, so it's really varied. Opuntia really has provided a huge boost to their reproduction. So when there was a lot of Opuntia available, a lot more animals were surviving, females were reproducing faster, so it definitely increased, but it's varied over the years. And we actually keep track of a lot of other troops in the area. So we study one focal troop, but we do local troop censuses. So every now and then, about 3-4 times a year, we'll go and find other of the troops in the area and record demographic information. So how many animals there are, what their health condition seems to be, how many infants, how many pregnant females, things like that. And so we do have those records, not just for our own troop, but for other troops in the area. And you can see it fluctuates over time, depending on ecological conditions, if there's a drought, if there's been a lot of food available and things like that.
Super. Just one last quick question. So the book can be used as a tourist attraction?
Yeah, if it's done right. Unfortunately, baboons are very good with their hands. We've seen in South Africa, for example, there's really intense human-wildlife conflict with the baboons, because once they associate humans with food, they can get very aggressive and entitled about that food. So definitely, we can use baboons as a ecotourism resource, but it has to be done in the correct way. And so we, prepare people when they go to the baboons. We explain how to behave. We explain, don't try to touch them. Don't bring food with you. So yeah, we can do ecotourism with them, and it can be a really good resource for the community, but it has to be done in a very intentional way.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rupi. I see 2 hands are up from Peter and Brian. First, Peter Fundi, you can go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Corinna, for that nice and informative presentation. In your presentation, you seem to have focused a lot on girl child. The emphasis is more on girl child. What about the boy child? What are you doing about the boy?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Unfortunately, we work within a cultural context that we didn't make, right? And so there's a lot of constraints to what we can do. So for example, if you notice, a lot of, actually all the local observers that we hire are men. And that's just because of cultural norms among the Maasai about who can be out on the landscape on their own with animals for the whole day and who shouldn't. And so it's the same with the school children, right? So there's some interventions that we can do more easily that fit better with the local culture and the community norms, and others that, we just don't have available. And maybe things will change in the future, and we will change with them.
Thank you. Thank you for the response to Peter's question. Brian, you can unmute and go ahead to ask your question.
Thank you, Richard. Corinna, this to maybe just get a clarification on the same. Now, the baboons being pretty intelligent, and for reasons that they are understudy where you operating from, and with habituation, I tend to feel like that could also influence their natural behavior. So does that really also translate to whatever the studies and being undertaken with the animals, or does habituation have no impact on their natural behavior? Thank you.
I wonder about this all the time. So in theory, the goal of habituation is that the animals will act when you're there as though you weren't, right? So the idea is they're so habituated, they're so used to having you around that they don't care if you're there or not. They're just going to behave the same way. And that's just kind of the premise that all long-term behavioral field sites go on, right? Because otherwise, what are we even doing? So that is kind of the underlying assumption. But there's been, for example, a really interesting study on guenons, and they are arboreal primates. And what they found was that the guenons would spend a lot more time on the ground when the observers were there than when they weren't. And that's probably because when there's large humans with you, predators are less likely to attack you when you're on the ground. And so even though the observers thought these guenons were completely habituated and were just behaving normally, it turns out that their presence was influencing their behavior. So we always have to be mindful of that. There's not really a good way to know what they would do if we weren't there. So there's not a really good way to know how their behavior changes when we're there. But you can compare behavior across field sites. You can try, just by looking at the baboon, seeing if your presence is affecting it or not. We don't get too close. So yeah, it's a really good question. And it's something that we have to kind of think about and contend with all the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Corinna, for that. I see Dr. Stan, Dr. Stan's hand is up. Dr. Stan, thank you very much for joining us. I will give you this opportunity to ask your question, and probably also because of the network instability in where you are, if you are able to tell us why today you are in Tana River County. Go ahead, Dr. Stan.
Thank you so much. I want first to, I really don't have a question. The questions I had are very to do with the chat. But I wanted to thank Corinna for accepting to give this webinar talk. This is our usual way of doing things, especially before we celebrate the International Primate, which we are actually going to in Tana River. Last year we had this in Nairobi, but this time around we get to the people who actually hold the key to those things. So the theme of this year's celebration day is actually what you've said.
Dr. Stan, we can't hear you clearly.
Promoting in where in places where they share space with humans. And
sorry for that. Actually, he's really facing a lot of challenges with the network. So maybe we'll try to reach out to him once he is stabilized. So maybe is there any other question, any comment from the audience before we bring the session to an end?
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
He's back.
Dr. Stan, can you hear us?
I think now.
Okay, maybe you can just try to turn off your video, then you can just.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. If you can try to turn off your video so that you don't overstrain the network.
Yes. Turn on video. Sorry, I'm using Madam Asha's.
Dr. Stan, can you hear us?
I'm back. So I was just trying to say that we are in Tana River, where we are going to celebrate International Primates Day. having decided that we have to get down to the local people, and given that the Tana holds one of the critically endangered primates, we decided this year we'll celebrate the day with the local communities in the lower Tana River. And we have some lined activities now and December 14th, when we will celebrate the World Monkey Day. And these are actually restoration activities. We target to plant 20,000 trees, and you can help us to plant these trees wherever you are, whatever sites you're working. We really want you to grow some trees for monkeys. And also, we are going to promote awareness in young people in schools. Corinna has presented a very good approach of painting in schools. We are going to engage in that with the local communities here, especially the young people in schools. And also, we are going to have public meetings where we will enlighten the people about primates and why we should conserve them. So my message to all is like, let's spread the good news of protecting primates. They matter a lot in the ecology and the ecosystem functioning. So that's why we are here in Tana. And those who can, please join us. And you can, if you can't join us in the actions to promote the survival of primates. Thank you so much, everyone who has attended. And also thank you so much, Corinna, for accepting to give this informative talk. And we look forward for such more in the future. So thank you so much. And thank you, Richard, for hosting us and trying to coordinate all this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. San. Before you go, there is a very hot question here that has just come straight direct to me. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can.
There's a question asking, who is Dr. Stan and where does he work?
Okay, Dr. Stan is one of the primatologists at the Kenya Institute of Primate Research. I'm heading the Department of Primate Ecology and Conservation there. And we've been doing a lot of work in conservation of primates. That is what I normally focus on. And I've actually worked with different people who are really interested in primates. And I call upon everybody to join the team, the Kenyan team, which is so much passionate about primates and trying to enhance their conservation. So that is me.
Thank you very much for that, Stan. It was really nice catching up with you despite the difficulties with your network. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Not unless there is one person with a burning question, a burning comment before we bring the curtains down.
I do.
Yes.
Just very briefly, Dr. Corinna, I edit the Wildlife Clubs of Kenya magazine called Komba. So this would be a great way to not introduce, but spread public awareness about the baboons through the magazine Komba. So
yeah,
if you
absolutely.
do,
Please reach out.
Contact. That would
I
be
will
great.
share my email in the chat if that helps.
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you.
And then please, yeah, anybody who has other questions or wants to connect, reach out to me. Yes, I would love to continue this conversation. Absolutely. And Stan, thank you so much for inviting me. This was such a great opportunity for me to just talk about the Baboon Project and talk about things that weren't just my own research. So this was fantastic. And happy International Primate Day, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Corinna. And also to thank all our, Glenn Most. Is it a congratulation or a question?
I think he's just clapping.
He's just clapping. Okay. Thank you very much for that. To all our participants, thank you very much for creating time to join us this lovely afternoon. It's afternoon here in Kenya. It's quite a cold afternoon. Thank you very much for creating time to join us. And from Nature Kenya and all the organizers, we are grateful and we wish you all a happy and productive International Primate Day tomorrow. Thank you very much and have a nice day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Hey,